make tonight possible. First of all, the Montgomery County Democratic Party for allowing us to use this space tonight. We are so grateful. Specifically Bev King, who helped me move tables and chairs at 5 o'clock tonight. Mike Brill, who is running our technology. Laurel Kerr and her membership committee, who provided refreshments in the back and also the sign-in. And then Kim Sempt Paris and her book committee, not book committee. They are the event committee, and they are selling books up here. So if you do want to purchase one of David's books, they are $16, and there's cash, check, or Venmo available up there. And I think he might even sign one for you at the end of tonight if you want him to. So that is there for you. I do have a few announcements. One of our Team Democracy leaders, Carol, wanted to share something that she's doing. So Carol Rowe, and we're going to talk about Team Democracy in a little bit, but this is an example of what they're doing. Do you want to shout out, or do you want the mic?
I can shout.
All right.
I was not a mayor for nothing.
There you go.
Calling all Miamisburg and West Carrollton Democrats to an event at my house on Saturday, April 12th from 2 to 4. I have the information here, so please see me before you leave for you to be involved. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carol. Showing community activism. The next thing I wanted to tell you about is our next South Dayton Dems meeting. And it is going to be Wednesday, March 26th at 7 o'clock at the Wright Library in Oakwood. So if you like what you hear tonight, if you enjoy being in groups like this with like-minded Democratic people, we would love to invite you to the South Dayton Dems. You do not have to live in South Dayton to come and join us. We will take anyone from any area in the Miami Valley. We'd be happy to have you. Our topic is actually going to be a guided discussion of the things that you're going to hear tonight from David. We're going to be breaking into small groups, and we're going to talk about what are some things that we can do. How can we take action collectively on the things we learned tonight? So I'm hoping that you're going to walk away tonight with your brain on fire, ready to go. I want you to germinate on that for a couple weeks and come back in 2 weeks and share it with us at this event. Just a little caveat, we have had an explosion of membership since the election, which we are so happy about. We're outgrowing the space that we are in. So if you can carpool, that is helpful. Realize you might need to park a few blocks away and walk. And if you can arrive early if possible, that does help us. It's going to be cozy, but you're going to be with other Democrats, so it's all good. Those are good people to leave us with. The other announcement that I have for you is about Team Democracy, which if you were at South Dayton Dems at our last meeting, you've heard us talk about this. Team Democracy, yeah, if you could, this will be good. It's a collective thing that Mel Rodriguez and I are doing. We are trying to organize our county into regional teams. And so what you just saw Carol Rowe do, that's what we are trying to do. As you can see here, she is our Miamisburg lead. So we are helping people get active with their friends, with their neighbors, with people who live near them. If you would like to be a member of one of these groups, be led by someone like Carol, who's going to do the organizing and tell you what to do, we would love for you to join Team Democracy. I'm going to put the QR code up here. But Mel, if you want to come up and talk a little bit about what this is, because this was Mel's brainchild.
Yeah. This comes from learning from the people who did the right things before us. So neighborhood team organizing is basically the seeds of the the grassroots, the spring activism across the country for our history. So this is just a simple thing. So this right now, if you'll notice, and you're saying, where's my city at? This is just the South Dayton Dems part of that. We are looking for people. We do have team leads in other cities, but we are looking for a team lead. So it's something that you're interested in. Even if we have a team lead there, it's better to have a few people involved with the team leadership. So we do have that QR code that's popped up here, but we're also, as you leave, we have clipboards people will have with the QR code that you can sign up. Even if you just think you might be interested, right? Please sign up because we can tell you more about it in depth, but it's bringing people together. So at minimum, we're making it very easy for you all. We'll have the team lead. They'll put together events, education, and just bringing people together. Some of it will be social if you want, and others will be educational, but it's really each team will give you the basic framework, and then you kind of create what you want for your team. Because what might work in Vandalia may be something different in Kettering, for instance. So we want to make it as tailored as possible for you all. Some of the things, like, for example, that we talked is, the basic thing, if you want to be a team lead, is just create your, we'll start you creating an email list, outreach list. And the nice thing about it is we will provide you with names of people So if you're a team lead in Kettering, for instance, we're gonna be giving you everybody that's in Kettering that signed up for Team Democracy. So that's awesome. Plus a list of other Democrats that you can reach out to. So it's not like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to start from scratch, you know, if you want to do leadership thing. So I already mentioned the social meetups. We'll have some training. Again, you're not on your own. This is a network and we're stronger together, as Allison Bedford says in the back. So we'll all be working together in this big network to make sure you're organized and have support. Yeah, I won't get into too much of the weeds on that, but that's the one thing that I want to make sure that people sign up. We're really excited about it. You want me to go ahead and say the next one? Okay, so the next thing I have to say, this is under Montgomery County Democratic Party. So folks in Montgomery County on 5 April from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We're going to be doing a activist summit, and it's also for any potential candidates or if you're thinking about running for office or volunteering. So no matter where you are in the county, if you haven't heard about it, I know SDDC, South Dayton Dems has been sending out, Montgomery County's been sending out free lunch. And our keynote speaker will be Dr. Amy Acton. So those of you who have never heard her speak, she's great. So she's going to be our keynote. We're also going to have a Senator or House Senator Willis Blackshear, Rep. Desiree Timms, Rachel Coyle from How the State House Works. They're going to kind of complement each other because they're going to tell you kind of what's going on, and Rachel's going to tell you how to advocate for it. So Rachel's amazing too. She does lots of great work in the state. And we're also going to have some other breakout sessions as well to help you get involved. So again, that's April 5th, 10 to 2 p.m. Keep an eye out for the emails, or if you want to hit me up before you leave, we'll get you connected. Thank you.
Thanks, Belle. All right, so I am going to introduce our speaker tonight. Many of you know who David Pepper is. You know that he is an author, an activist. He is the former chair of the Ohio Democratic Party. He's written 5 books, 6, maybe 6. You should know 6 books. He's written 6 books. You might see him on MSNBC and other news organizations. And I had a whole page-long bio of his that I could read. But I thought it might be more meaningful to explain to you all why David Pepper and his work are important to me personally and why I invited him here tonight. So I was introduced to David's work when someone recommended the book Laboratories of Autocracy to me. This was right when I had started my run for state rep, and so I was learning all these new things. And as I read that book, it was like my eyes were open. And I realized that all of the horrible things that I've been seeing, all of the MAGA extremism, the abortion bans, the attacks on marginalized groups, the attacks on public education, almost all of that was not coming from Washington, D.C. It was coming from Columbus, from people who most of us don't even know their names. And so it really invigorated me. I highlighted and underlined, I think, every single page. And then I found out that David was coming to speak to South Dayton Dems. And so I plucked up the courage to send him an email and say, hi, I'm a new candidate. I'm running for office. I'm going to be at South Dayton Dems. And if you want to say hi, that'd be great. And so I sent him an email, he emailed me back, and I met him at that meeting, and he became one of the most stalwart supporters of my campaign. He came up to Dayton for fundraisers for me. He introduced me to his network of Blue Ohio people who are supporting running candidates in every single race. He even hit up his parents to make donations to my campaign. Very nice. He checked in. Yeah, thank you. You all are welcome to do that too if I run again. He checked in with me regularly. He would call me, and when I lost my race, he called me again to see how I was doing. And so I share all of that with you so that you know that David Pepper is not just someone who writes blog posts and books and shows up on the news every once in a while. He's someone who does the work. And that's what we need right now. With the challenge that we are facing in our country right now, we need people who are doing the work, who can teach us how to do the work. The number one question that I get asked, and I will get asked this at a wine night with my neighbors, Rose, what do we do? What do we do? And I invited David Pepper here tonight because I think he can help us start to answer that question. Because what I don't want us to do is enjoy this evening, go home and say that was great, and go back to business as usual. We don't have time for that. We need to take action, and we need to take deliberate action that's going to make a difference. And I invited David Pepper because I know he's the kind of person who is not only doing that work, but he can help us know how to do it too. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce David Pepper.
Thank you, Rose. I was going to try and tape this for my Substack, but I'm not sure I'll figure out how to do it.
Thank you for that introduction. Rose was an incredible candidate, wasn't she?
Yeah.
I mean, was that here at her kickoff event? I honestly, it was one of the greatest opening speeches I've ever seen in a campaign. Everywhere I went in Ohio, I would meet Rose fans. One day I got a call from someone who didn't know why they were being billed for their Substack. It doesn't explain very well. This is a newsletter I write. And it was Rose's mom from Toledo. And she didn't know she was calling me to say, why am I paying this money? We had a great chat. On election day, I'm in Cincinnati working a poll in Madisonville. And someone walks in with, what did your stickers say on them? Yeah, she's walking with, I was, are you here for Rose in Cincinnati? She was, yes, right after this event, I'm driving to Dayton to campaign for Rose. So you were a hell of a candidate, and I really do hope you run again. Let's give her another round of applause. So, by the way, I love the South Dayton Dems. I feel like every year we get together, and it's always crowded, it's always packed. But to see this energy in the mid of tough times, especially exciting to see. So I'm going to start out with. Let me see if I get this to work. I don't know if I will. I'm going to see if this works. It's going live. I don't say anything about that. Okay, here we go. And I think they can see me. So I want to step back before we get into what we can do. And I love that you're having a session about that next time. I want to talk about it, and maybe it's self-explanatory because you're all here and you get this. I want to talk about why it is so important that we rise up right now. You already know that or you wouldn't be here, but there's still a lot of other people who are down for understandable reasons. Maybe they feel like there's nothing that can matter. You've probably heard that. You probably felt that. That it doesn't matter what we do. It's too late. It's too hard. Trump's doing too much. It feels overwhelming. And so before I talk about what we have to do, and there's a lot, we can spend several sessions on that, I want to talk about why it's so important that we do a lot right now, especially now. And I want to talk about this. And by the way, this is a little bit of a preview. I'm writing a second edition to the book, Saving Democracy, the Trump era. And I'm going to use some of this. And so when you write, you think a lot, which is one reason writing for me really helps me think. I'm sure that's true of a lot of you. So a lot I want to share is what I've been writing about as I think about how to present to people what we can do in this tough time. But I want to start with a email that I got following the election from a good friend of mine, who, like a lot of you here, is a believer in democracy. This friend actually studies it for a living. She's a professor. And she wrote me an email I've asked her if I could share it. I won't give her name, and she's allowed me to. But I want to. It sets up everything else I'm going to say. And she said, "Dear David," I'm not going to read all of it, but I'm in a state of deep sadness, but more than that, fear. I think the Trump guys are totalitarians, even madmen. I've never felt anything like this before. It's like the end of the world as we have known it. She goes on a bit, but she walks through all the reasons she is so afraid. Why do they think we will even have future elections? Elon Musk is showing contempt for any notion of separation of powers. Nothing makes any sense, she wrote. And then her final line was, tell me, this is a pretty heavy question, are you frightened too? I'm trying to find a reason to feel safe and protected, but this feels more like a war than an election. All my best to you, and thanks for everything you tried to do. Now that's one heavy email to get from somebody who literally teaches democracy. It's her profession. And so unlike most emails where I write back quickly, I wrote her back, I got your email, but give me a couple days. Because I actually think she was capturing what all of us were thinking. This was a few days later, and honestly, what I was thinking. So I thought, how do I respond to her in a way that is realistic, because I don't want to be, naively optimistic. But also kind of captures how I'm really feeling, because she asked me straight up, are you frightened? And I'm someone who runs around writing books about how we can save democracy. So she was kind of calling the question, how are you feeling given what's happened? And so about a week later, and a bunch of with 2 young kids, I get more done on airplanes than anywhere else. So I'm writing on my airplane. I wrote her a pretty lengthy email back. I won't read it to you, but it sort of shapes what I'm going to say. The first thing I wrote her was, I'm also fearful. Everything you described is real. She wasn't going into all sorts of crazy, seriously. She was describing the risks. And I wrote to her something that we all have to keep in mind. And my guess is we do, but sometimes others don't want to do this. The biggest, and this is kind of what I wrote, and she knows as well as I did, the biggest risk in history, the biggest mistake is underestimating the threat. History teaches us that. When you go back and read the books, who's the great historian? Eric, anyone read Beast, Guard of Beasts? Eric, who wrote the book? Who was it? Eric Larson. The ambassador of the United States in Germany in the 30s, it's a first-hand account. The lesson is the people who are saying, don't worry about it, we're all wrong. And the people saying, take the risk seriously, were the ones who should have been listening. That's where we are now. So I wrote her, I take every risk you describe seriously. It worries me. It should worry all of us. And there are going to be people out there that we encounter, and we see it too often. It's changing recently. Oh, you're getting carried away. It couldn't happen. Trump's a buffoon. It would never really happen. Don't take that advice. We're at a moment where the great risks, I'm afraid, are all possible. And so I basically said to her, yeah, I'm afraid too. And the risks you lay out are absolutely serious. And as someone who wrote a book called 2025, here's what will happen if he wins. Trust me, I've thought about all those risks. I wrote it trying to scare people into voting the right way. I was hoping it would become an irrelevant book. But now when you read it, a lot of what it's written is happening. So I take the risk incredibly seriously. But I wrote her at the end of saying, yes, I worry. I say, and she worried that Democrats were too quick to move on and to just kind of say, well, we're going to move to the next thing. And I said, I worry about that too. But when I wrote her this, I said, we have to see it, we have to confront it. But I said, but with all that said, I didn't use the word fear to describe my mood. I said, the word that describes my current mood is, and I didn't pick this accidentally or casually, resolute. I said, I feel resolute about doing something. And then I spent the rest of the email telling her why. And this is what I hope we can all share when you have people wondering, is it worth it? Is it too late? Here's what I told her, and this is, I will no longer read from my email, I'll just sort of talk. One, the history of our country is very clear. And that is that the battle we find ourselves in, although a lot of folks didn't see this, I didn't see it until I started writing these books, which makes you think. We're not in a new battle. The battle over the health and representativeness of our democracy, and doesn't represent the diversity of our people, has been the battle of our entire country's history. It's been the same battle the entire time. It feels really bad right now because it is bad, but also because a lot of folks, and I'm not pointing fingers, I was one of them, grew up after the Voting Rights Act, after John Lewis, after the Warren Court, and we thought, oh, we are incredibly the first generation of Americans that don't have to worry about that battle, if we even knew what the battle looked like all these centuries. But we're not. It turns out we weren't special. And we're in the same battle. And it's a fierce battle, and it always has been. And it's gone back and forth. There has always been a group of people, for a variety of reasons, that does not want a full, healthy, and representative democracy. That's true now. That was true 20 years ago. That was true in the 1870s. That was true. It's true throughout our history. And there are all sorts of reasons for it. There's billionaires don't want the people having a say in how their billions are treated. And there's white supremacy that doesn't want representative democracy. And there's a lot of other things going on there. But we are in the same battle that has always existed. Now that, I don't know if that makes you feel better, but it's something that we should see. We are not special if we thought we were. This is our wake-up call. But here's what does make me feel resolute knowing that. And it's that the generations that got us to the Voting Rights Act and to women voting and to the Warren Court. Now, knock on wood, I hope this remains the case. The civil rights heroes who fought for blacks to vote and be an abolition in the early 1800s, they had to fight through a lot more than we face even today. They just did. When they showed up to meetings like this, in certain parts of this country, at certain times, they were faced with violence, arrest, death. John Lewis, and we're celebrating that incredible march, when he walked across that bridge, he knew he may not live through it. I start my Saving Democracy book talking about my great, no, that's too many, one too many greats, grandmother who was at Seneca Falls. She was kicked out. She was not at Seneca Falls as a visitor. She actually lived there. She was a member of the church that hosted the conference. She was only a member of that church because a few years before, she was such a fierce abolitionist, she had been kicked out of the other church for conduct unbecoming a woman. Right? So some of what I think I inherited some of that. I think as I get older, I can't stop fighting this fight. I come from a long line of feminists. You know my mom, you know what I'm talking about. Well, Rhoda Denison Bement was part of it, clearly. She was fighting a battle that she knew full well wasn't going to have her voting. When the 14th Amendment mentioned men and only women, the suffragists were literally left out, and they knew it at the time. They kept going. And so they knew they were fighting for their granddaughters to vote. So when I look at the grand arc of this battle, as much as it's sobering to know that we are now part of this same battle we've always been in, I'm inspired to know that people who faced far worse probably appreciated the battle more than we have until recently. They fought through a lot more with a much longer game plan, and they did get us to the peaks that we've had. Does that make you feel a little bit better? Does it inspire us some? We're in the battle John Lewis was in. I think that actually in some ways gives us more purpose in life. We've been thinking about, oh, we're just about winning the next election, right? That's important. But we actually now inherit the baton we've grabbed from our forebears is far more weighty. In some ways, I think one reason you're all here, and the reason I can't stop being fired up, is now I realize, no, our role, whether we wanted it or not, is bigger than we ever knew. And I have a great quote from John Lewis when he was telling folks, we have the same role then. Now, I don't want to compare ourselves to them, but we are now in the same channel of fighting for democracy. And if we see that more clearly now, good for us. Because I think we'll fight, when you start planning all that you're doing, I think you'll be more intense about it. I think we'll be smarter about it than we've been in the past, where we've been planning elections every 2 years as if that's it. It's not just that. Okay, that's the first thing. We are in the same battle that we've been in our whole lives, our whole history. So the second, maybe even bigger revelation about why it's important to do what we're doing now is history also tells us. I'm trying to see if anyone can see this. Yeah, they can. 143 people watching on Substack Live. I've never done this before. Hey, everybody. I'm getting a lot of questions there, so I won't get to those yet. The history is also very clear that the battle again, it goes up and down. But when I hear this quote that the arc of the universe bends towards justice, or bends, but it bends towards justice. I worry that that's very passive. It bends in the direction of whoever's pushing it hard. That's our history, like it or not. It goes back and forth. But the lesson of our history is it's in the early days that so much is decided. We have inherited this baton. That's on us. But here's the other reality we've inherited. What we do now could determine if the dark times that my friend described last 2 or 4 years, or 40 or 50 years. What we do now. No joke. It's on us. The history is very clear. And the history is also clear that it's not the side that's fighting against democracy is always there. The KKK, moneyed interest, you name it. It's always been there. The factor that has determined the outcome has not been that side exists. It always exists. Sometimes it's less hidden, sometimes it's more intense. The side that has determined the outcome has been the other side. The side that's fighting for democracy. If it comes together and fights, it wins. And if it quits, the side that's always there fighting against democracy wins for decades or longer. That is how we got Jim Crow for a century. The parallels between now and the era where Reconstruction, the diverse democracy that existed for a few years in the South, disappeared. It was a back and forth struggle, but it was when the sort of white North quit that the back and forth struggle turned into a century of Jim Crow. There was a time in the 1870s where the majority of the state houses of most southern states were made up of black representatives. There were black Supreme Court justices, and there was a black member of Congress for 50 years out of the South, at least one. And if you had said to a young black man, obviously women weren't voting yet, in the 1870s, that in 40 years, no one knew, oh, by the way, the voting turnout in presidential elections of black voters was 60%. It was a diverse democracy. And there was a back and forth and back and forth. But there were still people voting. There was a diversity of elections officials. By the way, local mayors and sheriffs and police, it was diverse. But when the one side quit through some kind of cynical deal making that some Ohioans were involved with, unfortunately, that world disappeared. And 20 or 30 years later, that young African-American, let's say an 18-year-old African-American, would have gone from a world where all around the community people were voting. They may have known the state rep. They would have, known the local mayor. 30 years later, because the side stopped fighting, they would have almost probably not known a single voter. There would not be a single African-American elected official in their state the rest of their lives. Progress would be that maybe when they hit 80, Jackie Robinson was allowed to play baseball. And they started out with democracy everywhere. And what happened there was a couple years turned into lifetimes. Not because the one side fought more, they were always fighting, because the other side quit. And one way this effect happens, and I use that example of the 1870s for a reason, and this is sort of a weird, dangerous phenomenon, but the collective memory of the country changes very quickly. Well, think about our country. When Donald Trump lost by 7 million votes, he got crushed in 2020, folks. People thought he was a terrible president, and he was. And they were scared to death of what he did during COVID. And they knew we were losing jobs before COVID ever hit. And Ohio lost jobs in 19 before COVID ever hit. 4 years later, the same country, its memory had changed. The approval numbers on Trump when he won were as if he'd been a good president. People had remembered incorrectly, oh yeah, we lost jobs because of COVID. Actually, that wasn't true. We lost him then, like we're about to lose him now, because he's crazy. And his policies are trickle down, and it's chaos. We lived through it, but we forgot. And the collective memory problem is a real issue when you think about the health of our democracy. Because just like by 1920, although some would have known it, if no one you know, if you're a young African American, has ever voted, and there's not one elected official, you don't realize just how insane that is versus 40 years before. You don't know to demand better because all you've ever known is that white supremacist world. And we face the same risk right now with our young people. With my 8 and 10-year-old asking questions every single day about what they are seeing. Because we all know none of it's normal. Billionaires shouldn't be running our country. They shouldn't be tearing up the federal government. We shouldn't have racism just open and everywhere. All of it is insane, right? But and we all think that. But every year that goes by, that we let that be the normal, some of us move on, pass away, get disengaged. And every year that goes by, a generation rises that thinks it's okay. Or they don't know that it's not normal. I think of it, some of you think this is a silly analogy. Remember when baggage was free under an airplane? When I see, hey, you have free baggage under, I'm like, I'm not impressed. It used to always be free. But if you're 25, you're like, what a bargain. It's a free bag. Their memories, they've never seen it otherwise. And that's the same risk we face on abortion bans, all kidding aside, and all of it. And so if we don't fight hard right now to fix the collective memory before it goes the other way, and I don't mean just by getting in office and doing good things, but at the very purpose of public service at all. Rose ran like I ran, like Debbie ran, like everyone here is in office. We think it's supposed to be a public service, not greed, not tearing everything apart, not what's Trump's I'm blanking on the word, just his revenge tour. That's not why people run or ran. Trump's convincing people like J.D. Vance that is why you run. And it's going to make good people like Rose not want to run. Our collective memory about what politics even is going to change if we're not careful. So those of us who understand that this is not at all normal and is wrong and needs to be fixed quickly, we have a responsibility right now. Because history tells us if we let it settle in, if we let the people who populate these positions all think it's because they get to attack their opponent or jail them or everything else, if we let that settle in over time, it locks in for a very long time. And that's why, that's scary, right? I mean, that should scare action. Because if we let that happen, the risks are that my 8 and 10-year-old and you and your kids and your grandkids, they're living this way for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and a lot of them won't even know that this isn't what America is supposed to be. And that's exactly why Jim Crow lasted so long. It was such a retrenchment. That's not an arc of the universe bending in one direction. It got crushed. And then it took a whole new generation to pick it back up from a world that would have been unthinkable in the 1870s, as tough as it may have been. So we have an obligation to fight now to not let that just settle in. And we should feel that every day. So a couple other things, and then I'll close up. But I wrote this to her in December, and I was right. I said, we have to also move quick because they will move fast. They were very clear that this was about shock and awe, and we are clearly seeing that. I also said we got to get organized because people will need help. And that's true. People need help. People who are being thrown under the bus by all these policies need our help. They need our voice. Okay, that's kind of the tough inspiration that we have to be involved. But here's the part that I hope helps channel energy into all you're going to do. Here's what I wrote then, and it's very clear. So, it's happening. 1, I wrote, again, this was in November. They have no mandate, and they will overreach.
They already have.
Exactly. Exactly. So this is gonna be a little bit of tough conversation for a second about Democrats. While there are large arcs that explain why we lost the election, like the nonstop battle, like the fierce backlash from the diverse democracies, see, so much of what we've lived through since I was about in my mid-30s was a reaction to Obama winning. We know that. That's our history. We know that. It's also about laboratories of autocracy. They have been smarter about gaining power in state houses, which has allowed them to win elections easier than they used to, or than if we had fair districts. That's also a factor, and we have not been as good about that as they have been smart about. That's a factor. But there's another factor, and this is the one that's a little more very short term. And that is that incumbent presidents who are unpopular lose the election. And in hindsight, when Kamala Harris entered and re-energized everyone to her great credit, it sort of blinded us to the fact that in the end, for whatever reason, Joe Biden was an unpopular incumbent who had inflation issues, and you don't win those elections. You just don't. They're not winning them anywhere in the world. You don't win those elections in America. And that was an election that structurally was very difficult to win. And I believe Kamala Harris lifted the prospects of our winning a great deal to make it close. But standing in the last 4 months, where you have a very unpopular incumbent in the middle of inflation, is a very tough assignment. And I think she did a hell of a job trying to lift us up. And she ended up making, let's give her a round of applause. She made it very close. Okay? With about 100 days, made it very close. But I think without consulting people, and we should ask ourselves, and this is where we have work to do, why was Joe Biden so unpopular? Because the economic numbers outside inflation were actually historically good.
Because of the tweet.
Yes, and we have to study what we did, knowing the media is not going to be our friend. What did we do wrong, and what do we need to do better to not be unpopular when we're actually doing good things overall? That's a problem. But the fact is, he was in the end an unpopular incumbent with inflation in a tough cycle, and you lose those elections. And it was still very close. The point of all that is to say, this was not some big right-wing mandate. Donald Trump barely won an election that was structured for him to win. He barely won. And that's what I was saying in this response. There's no mandate. I was saying this before I even knew what they were going to do. And it was already clear what they were going to do. There's no mandate for almost any of this stuff. Not even close. But Republicans who largely, as Rose knows, have lived in gerrymandered districts their entire lives are in right-wing bubbles. So not only do they not know if there's a mandate, because they actually never interact with swing voters. Look at Mike Johnson. Do you guys know the history of Mike Johnson? The Speaker of the House, his first, Rose, how great would this be, or Debbie? His first race for the State House, his primary was uncontested, and his general was uncontested. He's in office without ever being in an election. His re-election to the State House was uncontested. What a career. Then the next then he runs for Congress. 3 gerrymandered 35-point victories. Then he gets another uncontested race. And his next election for any office is he's elected Speaker of the United States. That's his whole career. He's never been in democracy. Acts like it too, right? Yep. So the point is, they're living in the State House here as part of it. They're living in a non-democratic right-wing bubble. So they don't care about mandates to begin with, which makes them on very perilous ground as they come into power, having literally barely won an election that the structure was pretty clear they're going to win. And that is going to cause, and what they're doing is clearly going to cause a lot of pain. But that overplaying of their hand and their mandate turns into an opportunity we must take advantage of immediately. Yeah. Immediately. And we're already seeing it, folks. There was some number I saw before I drove up today. By the way, I got picked for a jury, so I left the jury duty to drive up here. I'm in the middle of a long trial, believe it or not. And we can't use your phones, which is very difficult for me. We got to turn them off during the whole thing. But I somehow saw, and I follow the rules, by the way, but I did somehow see that Trump's numbers on the economic performance are already way underwater. What they are doing on public schools is disastrously unpopular. And I know that is there a Dayton public school? I saw some signs out front. Like, what they are doing on universal vouchers is an absolute disaster policy-wise. And Rose spoke about this as well as anyone. It also turns out to be deeply unpopular when people understand it. We need to go on offense. And they're in such a bubble, they either don't know it or they don't care because billionaires are paying them to do it. Quick story on schools. So on the same day that Trump won this country's election, he won Kentucky like 65-35. Right. Okay. Does anyone get my Substack, by the way? I do these newsletters. You should sign up. I don't make you pay anything. Well, I was trying to make myself feel better the day after that terrible election. And I had been watching the voucher referenda in different parts of the country. And you all know that no universal voucher referendum has ever passed when put to a vote. People hate these things because they understand them. And in Kentucky, I don't remember the exact numbers now, but when Trump won Kentucky like 65-35, the universal voucher referendum, which would have opened up Kentucky to what we have in Ohio, which is these horrible universal vouchers, it lost by at least 65-35, if not 70-30. It lost in every single county in the state of Kentucky. Every one. And it didn't, and by the way, it did better in like the Montgomery counties. It did worse in the most Republican rural counties of that state. So I decided to drive to one of them a few days later. I went to Robertson County, Kentucky. It is the smallest county of Kentucky, 2,000 people. It also voted for Trump 80-20. And here I am as the former Democratic chair showing up to ask some questions. And I went to the dollar store, the gas station, the library, and I didn't make it partisan, which is a good messaging device for people running in red areas. But I said, hey, I'm really curious. Why do you think it is that Kentucky, in this county in particular, this county voted against the vouchers 80-20? Crushed it. And everywhere I went, I said, why do you think that happened here? They're like, well, why should my money go to private schools? They looked at me like it was a crazy question. And then I would dig a little further and they're like, we don't have a private school anywhere near here. That's where the rich kids go. And then they said, it was also common sense. And then they said, and this is what it really came to, and we love Robertson schools. And we know that our schools are at risk of going under. Why do we want our money to go there and leave our school? 80-20, folks. And then they said things like, and the teachers were on Facebook explaining how this would hurt our schools, and we love our teachers. And by the way, I love teachers' unions, but they weren't talking about the unions. They were talking about the individuals. And that principal is outside of the school every day, rain or shine, waving to the parents. One woman, I didn't notice in the end, had the school's cheerleading like logo on her earrings. The point is, like, on all these issues, gutting the Department of Education, where a lot of the funds go, I think one of the most vulnerable issues that they're currently attacking isn't just the RFK insanity. The NIH cuts. They will destroy universities, and that's their goal. J.D. Vance is very clear. He wants to he thinks universities are the enemy. And whether it's the protests, or whether it's DEI, or whether it's accreditation, or whether it's putting right-wing people to lead these schools, or whether it's the NIH cuts, they are dead set to crush these places.
How did he ask this?
And yeah, he's got his degree. Yeah, I went to the same school. Vivek and the JD, all from Cincinnati, went to Yale Law School. So maybe I took the right classes, I hope. The point is, you think that's popular? To cut research? To stop current active trials for cancer cures? I think people are scared to death of that. So the point is, on and on and on and on. If we are on offense and we are smart and we are running in every single district of this country, we can go after them for all that they're doing. And that's not even getting into the results that we know are coming. It's one thing if you're pushing a popular policy. That's already an opportunity. Again, I don't like that they're doing it. It's causing a lot of pain, but politically, it gives us our comeback opportunity. But their policy, this isn't like academic and it's not games, like policy matters. And we know what's going to happen. This is literally an intentional creation of unemployment, if you look at the mass layoffs. I mean, I can't remember the last time anyone literally was trying to lay off hundreds of thousands or more people. They're trying to do it. They are intentionally looking like they're going to raise prices. They are intentionally destabilizing trade relationships and the international order. They are destroying infrastructure that we depend on for our economy, like safe travel on airplanes or weather prediction, all of it. This isn't like games. The impact for all this will be real. And and let alone the fact, and by the way, I hate to say it, chapter 4 of my book 2025 is literally about firing all the good people at CDC as a bird flu takes off. That's the chapter. That's what they're doing.
Awesome.
And as this stuff, and so we know from 2018, and we know from Trump's first term, this stuff mattered. COVID was so much worse because of him.
Yeah.
We know that. The economy was going down in 19. First year since the Great Recession that Ohio lost jobs. January through January, 19 through 20. COVID wasn't here yet. We know what's going to happen. And so their policies are going to hurt people. I mean, and if they get into the Medicaid cuts and the other things, I mean, it's so much. We need to protect people as best we can. The Democrats in Washington need to fight it all as hard as they can. I saw someone say the other day, a senator, I'm not going to allow appointments to this department because of this issue. I'm like, you're allowing them to any departments, given what they're doing. Like, stop it all if you can. But to the extent there is damage and there is this extremism that's almost entirely out of touch with where Americans are, that overplaying of their mandate is the opportunity. And I'll say two other things on that. And this gets to your work. Where have states, and this gets back to the first two books, Laboratories of Autocracy, Saving Democracy. Where have parties out of power made their comebacks? How have they come back when they feel like we do? How did Karl Rove do it after we won in 2008? Did you realize in March of 2019, there was a cover story of Time magazine with a picture of an elephant that said extinct? Everyone thought after Obama's win, the Republican Party was done. What did Karl Rove do? What did the Republicans do? Any guesses? State houses. They didn't say, we're going to go win the Senate, although they did. Karl Rove in March of 10, and I lived through this. I was running for state office, unfortunately for me. I liked the campaign, by the way, but it was a tough year. He wrote an editorial in the Wall Street Journal. And he said, he called it a shot. It's actually kind of impressive. I don't mean to compliment Karl Rove. He said, we're going to win this thing back through Portsmouth, Ohio. And he named a bunch of cities where they had targeted small towns, state house races. He told us what he was doing. And we were still celebrating Obama's victory like it was the end-all be-all democracy, while they were going for broke in state houses. And we all know what happened in 2010, don't we? I drove down 75 that day on the election day. I could feel it. We didn't show up because we only focus on federal. We only were excited about federal then. They made a beeline at State House. They flipped them all. We've been living with it ever since.
Yeah.
Ever since. What did we do when we were out of power? Howard Dean, 50-state strategy. Same thing. It helped lead to 06, which was great here. So the lesson is very clear. When they're overreaching, but we're not going to just defeat their overreaching by running around the halls of DC saying it. It's going to start at the front line, which is state house seats and local races this year, school boards, front line of democracy right there. That's where they're trying to ban books and censor before they even get to universities. Local races. So get ourselves to the state level, because whether it was we came back after Bush's second term win through the 50-state strategy, or the very painful lesson of what Karl Rove did, which was not go run around Congress, but go for broke at the State House level when they convinced people that we were overreaching. Remember the Tea Party? The biggest benefit for them was that it showed up and flipped state houses everywhere. And with that power, they've done all the damage that Rose mentioned. And that brings me to my last point. But by the way, one other thing, and this is to your point. So all we have to be doing right now is gearing up, not all, politically, gearing up to do that here, do that everywhere. Gerrymander district or not, run against these extremists and point out NIH cuts, all the other stuff, vouchers, so much of it's unpopular. Point it all out. If we don't run, no one even knows. People are voting for people who are doing things they hate. They don't even know it if they don't have an opponent. So we have to do that. We have to gear up now. Secondly, and you talked about this, we have to organize every damn precinct in the state of Ohio. Come on, let's do it. I mean, are you like me where at the end of the election, and I don't say this to criticize, I was the party chair too, I get it. It's not that easy. We have not set the expectation right. But I'm so tired of knocking on doors in the last month and skipping so many of the people because they've never been engaged before that, so they're not registered and they haven't voted. You all know what I'm talking about. You go to 4 houses and you have wonderful conversations with 2 people each, and then you skip the apartment building where 40 people live, and they might as well not be in America's democracy because we don't even talk to them. And the work we can do through this group right now can solve that. Every precinct captain owns the precinct. When someone says to me, well, it's not so safe to go in the apartment building, I was like, well, recruit one captain who lives in that building and let them go to all the hallways and recruit a hallway captain for each floor. This is that work right now. And that's how you start building up for next year. Now they're trying to change this through this horrible SAVE Act. So keep an eye on the SAVE Act. It is a disaster if it happens. Hopefully it doesn't. If you are involved, again, your precinct organizing, everyone in a precinct takes stock. Is your precinct captain doing the job? If not, offer to help. If they somehow say, I don't want any help, say, if you don't start doing something, we're going to have to. Every precinct should be organized. But in the same way, and this is part of the laboratories book, while I'm here going on about this stuff, if you're in any nonprofit in any way, free store food bank, homeless shelters, ask the leadership. If you're on the board, you give money, volunteer. Hey, are you registering the constituents you serve? Did you think about doing so? Because you could. In fact, I think your mission should include lifting the folks you serve who are homeless, who are food insecure, or need health issues because they're at a health clinic. Let's get them while we're signing them in. Let's ask them if they want to be registered if they're not. The mayor of every city in the state should be using every public-facing part of their city hall to register every constituent who comes through the door who they work with. If the state house, gerrymandered right-wingers, are going to suppress all of our voters, we should feel annoyed is a nice word, pissed that they're going after our people. And if I'm a mayor or I'm a county commissioner or anything else, and by the way, I say this, I didn't do this when I was on city. I didn't think about it. But now that I'm here, I'm like, my God, they're attacking all of our voters. They're systematically destroying the electorates of Dayton and Cincinnati and Cleveland, Columbus. So the mayors and leaders of these cities and all the nonprofits, we should say, well, we're going to fight back. If you're going to use your time and our tax dollars suppressing our voters, we're going to use our time getting them back on the roll. And so one assignment for your group, everyone here has a this is really going far in the laboratories, by the way. Everyone here has a footprint of involvement in your community. Take stock in it. It's beyond this event, although it's beyond this group. Any nonprofit, any alumni group, any mayor you know, any council member you know, think about how they could all be playing a role in lifting us back into democracy. And if you all did this as this group, and you all took out, I have a little graph, by the way, on my website. If you fill out your footprint, say, well, I'm on this board, and I do this thing, and I'm in this neighborhood group, and I'm a precinct captain. If we all said, from now on, we're going to use every part of what we do with democracy, if this room did it, it would change Dayton overnight. So let's do that. So the last thing I'll say, and then open for questions. The timing of what I'm describing is in our favor. As bad as it feels right now, and it is bad, and I don't make light of it. I don't want to politicize how bad it is. We have to fight it all. The timing is in our favor. This is the second, it gets lost because Biden interrupted it, but this is the second term of the Trump presidency. And he's very unpopular, and he's way overreaching his mandate. As much as George Bush ruined his mandate when he wanted to privatize Social Security. Remember that in the second term? That was the first thing that came. And Katrina was a disaster. What they're doing now is far more than, I mean, Social Security is just one of the many things they're trying to destroy. And so, again, you don't say this because it's inevitable. You have to position yourself, though, for it. If this is like the second term of an unpopular Republican president, then this has the makings, if we get our act together, and if we prepared, if we're out on offense and message correctly and learn from our mistakes, this isn't even 18, folks, it's 06. And you all remember 06. Yeah. That's the best year we ever had, with my lifetime at least. That's when Sherry won the Senate race. That's when Ted won all over. That's when, I think we flipped the State House in 08, but we made massive gains in 06. Because there was an unpopular incumbent president in the midterm and Howard Dean had 50-state strategy. And we cared more about the state level. And the other opportunity right now is, and I don't want to get carried away with this because we have to fight for it all. Nothing's been given to us. I hope, now this is the part where I hope none of them are watching. I hope that we've won every special election going back for years. Like, we care more now on the state level than they have when Trump is not on the ballot. And my hope is that, and we had a very good 22 when we normally would lose in those midterms. So my hope is that over time, we are now figuring out that it is about the state level races up. And they're the ones who only get excited when Trump's on the ballot, and they're the ones who forget it. That they make this, we can't count on this. But if you look at the recent patterns, when Trump has not been on the ballot, they don't show up. And my hope is we're the ones who start to show up in these other years. So the point is, not only does history, I'm going to close with this, history tells us we've been in the same battle we've always been in. It can be won in tougher circumstances. We better do it because the damage if we don't lasts a very long time. That's our responsibility. But the opportunity is they're way overreaching. A mandate that does not exist. Almost everything they're doing is deeply unpopular. Vouchers being a clear example. We should be running on it every single district in the state of Ohio, every single time until we end them. Does anyone applaud for that? I mean, we gotta get rid of it. They're destroying Ohio, like Kentucky, loves their public schools, and they're destroying them so billionaires make some money out of it.
Private equity was the
Right. Disaster. And private equity is funding it. So all of that together, if we go on offense on their overreach, and we do it stateward up, like when parties have succeeded, that's what they've done, and we do it in the year that history tells us could be the most opportune year in a long time, then we can turn this around, can't we?
Yeah.
Let's go, everybody. Thank you all very, very much. I'd love to answer your questions.
I think we visit your little experience. Everybody hear me?
No.
Oh,
Can you pass the mic?
it's dangerous, but I'll do it for you.
You're a good man. And I mean that.
Thank
with
you.
all my heart. Well, thank you. I'm sort of new in the community, but I've returned. And why? I think because of what we're dealing with. But as I started to say, I would like to revisit that experience that you had in Kentucky and ask you, if I may, what do you think was the key strategy that you used to inspire the response that you got?
Sure. Thank you. The question was, so I guess you already had mine. I think it was mainly that I knew the issue of their community. I knew that they had voted that way. And it was a completely nonpartisan conversation about their school system. Someone asked me the other day at an event months ago, who is in Oklahoma? Believe it or not, I go around and I speak to those red areas trying to give them some hope. And so I spoke to the rural chairs of Oklahoma. Now, that's a tough crowd to get fired up. It's tougher than here. And one of them said, whenever I have my Democratic Club meeting in my county, no one shows up. I said, make it about the schools, and maybe they will. And I think, well, let me finish. I think that's what it was. So it was a very I made one mistake in one conversation, and you'd all appreciate this. I asked one gentleman at the gas station, it sounded like I was asking him how he had voted on it. He was like, are you asking how I voted? I said, oh, no, I'm sorry. I did not mean to suggest that. I said, and then I got a better script in my mind. I said, why do you think this county voted so much against it? And you know what's funny is they would then say to me after I actually offended him, they'd say, well, I don't know why they did, but I'll tell you why I voted against it. So they would own their vote. They knew about their vote. They were literally kind of touting. But here's what I want to say. So that less partisan approach did work. But here's what I want to say. I wanted to go back to Robertson County the next week. It was really, moving is not the right word, but I felt a really profound experience. And this is incredibly rural, very run down. The school truly is the palace of the county. I saw it. It sticks out like all the other girls are run down. This one was phenomenal, and they're scared they're going to lose it. But the lesson I learned, that I thought I was going there to learn about public education, and I did. It's so valued. It's the heart, especially in Mercer County and others. There's nothing else in most of these counties. My wife grew up in Adams County. You get rid of North Adams High School, that's the community. It's just gone. And I sense that in Robertson County, and that's true in almost every county of Ohio. You get rid of those schools, there's nothing. Jobs, center of culture, Friday Night Lights, you name it. But here, so I learned about that, and it reaffirmed for me that. But here, the part I mentioned that I think really gets to, again, going back to Rose, how do we organize? I learned about organizing in that county and communication, and this is what we all have to think about. Because although there were ads spent, if you look it up, there were great ads spent against this referendum measure by Andy Bashir and folks who didn't want them. But my experience in that county was, this thing was finished in that county before the ads ever ran. Why? Because local trusted voices were telling everybody, this thing's a loser for our community. That principal, those teachers, the retirees who met the library every week, trusted local leaders, most of whom were probably Republican, were saying to one another at the sports games where they worked the snack bar, they were communicating amongst each other that this thing would hurt their community. And I heard that as I went. There was a Facebook page and they said it, so we listened. And so I think the other lesson is about our organizing. If all we do is dial off databases that don't have any connection to the community of who's listened to, that have some touch the fabric of that community, we're not getting into these communities. And that's why precinct level organizing and the other really ground level stuff, it's not just about later knocks on doors, it's about the communication itself. And when the teachers of that community and the principals and librarians were all saying this is bad for us, there was no TV ad that the voices were going to run that were going to change the mind. So I think there's a real lesson in the communication. And so we have to divide up our organizing, just as you described, into units that are small enough and local enough that that's how we're operating. And I think whether it's candidate elections or issue elections, that was the other lesson learned. You know, point before the others?
Yeah, it's kind of a two-part challenge here.
Okay.
Again, I think, and I probably should just come out and say it. It's just my humble opinion that the thing that you did that was effective was ask a question.
Yes.
And start a conversation. Now, yes, being a little educated about what's going on in the community is essential before you can ask an intelligent question. And I mean, we're all wondering, what the hell, do we want this?
We need to ask.
So the question is, what do you want? And that's, yeah, or one more thing. A list of these kinds of questions would be very helpful to a lot of people.
Well, you know, one of my favorite moments of the and I did, you're right. I literally just said, Hey, I'm from out of town. I drove from Cincinnati. By the way, I have a F-150 black pickup truck, so maybe that helped me be incognito. But one question I asked at the gas station was a guy who said, "Oh, I voted for it. I really wish it had passed."
You got people to think.
And I said to him, and then he goes, "But I'm not from this county." I think, well, that probably makes sense. But then I said, "Well, why do you think it passed?" And he wasn't mad. He goes, "Well, I think it probably passed because half the people in this community rely on that school." And I said, "I think you're right." So even he understood it. Even he
Well, that's
understood
the
it.
point.
Questions? So we got 1, 2, 3. Go ahead in church.
Especially younger people, they feel like with the urgency, we can't wait 2 years to have a blowout election. It may not even be an election.
Yes.
The way things are going. So how do you feel about things, like, mass rallies against Tesla,
Yes.
501 rallies?
Great question. I wanted that to come up because I had already spoken too long, but I wanted to get to that. So John Lewis, you'll know I want to get that because I have quotes about it. I just read a biography of John Lewis. It's phenomenal. So often in his journey, John Lewis, including in the heart of the Freedom Rides, was told to back off. It's too much. Can't keep going on the streets. It's too risky. The Kennedys didn't want to do it. They thought it made them look bad. And here's what he said. By the way, I want to quote his first thing about that gets into how we've all gotten the baton. He said, "At certain points in life, in the flow of human existence and circumstances, the spirit of history finds you or selects you, it chases you down, and you have no choice. You just allow yourself to be used, to be guided by this force, and to carry out what must be done." I think that's us, folks. I think that's us. He was saying that's what guided him. And when he describes that, when I say we've inherited this, and it may feel more weighty, but I believe, if you're here tonight, I believe that's our station in life. But secondly, to your question, when he was told to back off, here's what he said. And by the way, I said this at a 501 rally last Tuesday in Cincinnati of 300 people. And I will say it to whatever rally I'm invited to speak at. And thank you to anyone going to these town halls or Tesla Pro. All of it is incredibly important. Incredibly important. And here's why. He said it when he was told, back off on the Freedom Rides. Which were, I didn't realize till I read, some of you will know this. As courageous as anything that was done in the civil rights movement, those young kids getting on those buses. No, stopped in depots where they were surrounded by law enforcement or others beating the heck out of them, to put it nicely. Here's what John Lewis said about his willingness to continue doing it. "We had gotten this far by dramatizing the issue of segregation, by putting it on stage and keeping it on stage." And he knew it had to be public. I love when people make calls and post. We got to do all that stuff. But it needed to be public. He wrote, "I believe firmly that we need to push and not stop pushing. I believe in action. Dr. King said, there is no noise as powerful as the sound of marching feet of a determined people, and I believe that. I experienced that." So to your question, I think these rallies really matter. And one other thing about messaging. We know how much, you said it, or we are tired of this. And then there's a MAGA crew that loves it. It's getting smaller, but it loves it. And then there are a bunch of people in between who can't quite, they're not left, and they believe some of what the right says about the left, but they know they don't like this Doge stuff. And they're kind of, people run for, we run to people all the time on my jury, they're kind of in the middle. And they kind of think everyone's a little crazy, by the way. They're like, everyone seems to be fighting. If no one has a protest, those people may very well conclude, it must not be that bad. Because no one's really doing anything about it. And in America, when something's bad, we expect to see more than just, as important as they are, phone calls to congresspeople. And so I think in addition to mobilizing, and I hope these get bigger and bigger and bigger, and I hope Tesla loses every time they have because of these boycotts. I also think the message it sends to people who are a little concerned, by the way, the rally I went to, the woman who organized it, had never done a rally in her life. And she got 300 people, but she was concerned. She had read one of my books, and that's why she reached out to me. And the more people see, it's a message and not just organizing. My gosh, everyday people are so upset about what's troubling me that they're outside of City Hall and outside of Tesla. That message shows people, as this woman said to me, she's not in the minority, she's in the majority. And most people that she knows are also upset. So it's a really important message to send to do all of that activity. So the more you do it, the better. If you do it around here, let me know. I'd love to come. Like, I think it needs to get bigger and bigger and bigger. That's what the Tea Party did in the other direction. And we got to do it here. Yeah, you had a question? And then, oh, sorry, I'll go behind you and then her and then you.
I was done like my growth. And I was in California and there was a right food. And I would go into rooms kind of like this, and there were these more mature people. And I would say to them, why are you here? And they said, I have been fighting for this since the 30s. I have been through the 40s. I have been through the 50s. I belong to the Women's Garment Workers Union. I belong to the Longshoremen's Unit. And it's so important, I can't stop. And now I'm one of these more mature people. I guess I better not stop, and the rest of you too, because then we actually encourage people like mine to do what he's doing.
Thank you. The other, one of the biggest take homes, and there was a quote from Walt Whitman I heard the other day. My phone died, so I can't find it. That democracy is not just about elections, and that's what they are telling you. Democracy is the entire every day of fighting for it. So to your point, and this is a big theme of some of these books, is we all need to have our long game battle for democracy. It's not too. This is protest. This is using nonprofits to register people. It's the precinct organizing, but it's not just the campaigns. It's all of it. That's how people in the past would have seen it. You think that John Lewis or the suffragists were only gearing up for get out the vote efforts in October? That's like, sounds like a joke. That's how we treated Battle for Democracy for years. So it's got to be a long game strategy, and it's got to be a continual strategy. And there's critical work to be done right now. And then there's critical work to be done as we build to this opportunity I described in next year. Yes?
Yes, it's Blue Ohio, part of Act Blue.
No, actually, it's. Do you want it to be?
No.
Okay, it's not.
Okay, the next question is,
Yeah.
what is Act Blue that it's imploded and all of its leadership has resigned?
I know nothing about that.
Okay.
But does anyone know what Blue Ohio is? I'll do a very 2-second pitch for it. So I touched on it. Yes, the media has done bad things to us, and gerrymandering's awful, and I fought every moment of the last 12 years or so against it. But we also make our mistakes. One of the greatest mistakes we have made is not caring about races that aren't in swing districts. And all of a sudden, we have Mike Johnsons who have literally spent their entire career without ever facing an opponent, and we wonder why they're extremists. And so what Blue Ohio does, and I started it as I wrote the second book, is I basically thought, if we can give, Amy McGrath $80 million for running against Mitch McConnell, can we convince some people to give so we run in every single state house district of the state of Ohio? And I hope the answer was yes. And anyone here, I know some people, who here is part of Blue Ohio? The website is blueohio.org. I'm not here to tell you to join it, but go look at the website. You'll be interested. Blueohio.org, we basically crowdfund $8 or $10 a month from every member, and we give it to the state house candidates in the hardest districts first. We call it the reverse bathtub model. And we start with them because they're the ones who can make phone calls for weeks and no one calls back. They're the ones who communities can't, like Robertson County, don't have funds to get $500 donors. A $20 contribution is a good contribution in some of these communities. Well, Blue Ohio is a group of people that say, we know there's a disconnect But we think not running in 30 or 40 counties or districts in the state is a disaster for democracy because it means a bunch of extremists can do crazy things like destroy their own schools and no one even knows. So in the last 2 years, we have more than 1,000 members. And 2020, there were literally, in addition to about a dozen uncontested races, there were 13 state house races in Ohio where the Democrat had less than $5,000 in their whole campaign. In 2022, when I started Blue Ohio, that number went from 13 to 0 because we raised several $100,000 and we helped people from the bottom up. So no one had less than 5,000. Last November, our little group of people, our little Blue Ohio, which is on like blue, we raised $400,000. And not a single state house candidate, we had half as many uncontested races, and not a single state house candidate in Ohio had less than $12,000. Why? Because our community filled the gap. We ended up helping 58 candidates. And so the confirmation here is people are seeing, now there are other great, this is the good news. The good news is we're not, when I say let's go to bat and go to town on state house races, we are not starting from scratch. There's a wonderful group, some of you may know, called the States Project. And they are taking blue state donors and convincing them to get their money and give it to swing and red state houses. And I'm on calls with them all the time. They were one of the biggest donors to state house candidates in Pennsylvania that flipped 12 seats in 2022 to make Pennsylvania state house red blue. In 50 years, there has not been a single state house that flipped from red to blue when Democrats had the White House in a midterm. In 2022, it happened in the Minnesota Senate, the Michigan House and Senate, the Pennsylvania House, meaning there is some momentum building towards the state house path I'm talking about. That's why when I say I think they're the ones who may be losing focus, we have things like Blue Ohio, we have things like States Project, we have groups like Run for Something. Some of you may know them. So there is some infrastructure building, but if you're interested in the state house one for Ohio, check out Blue Ohio. And by the way, every month we have a Zoom call. We invite, Rose, you were a special guest a bunch. Last week, we had Amy Acton on last time, so do check it out. I know I'm getting the hook here, but one last question. Rose, okay? Oh boy, now we're going. Okay, I'll be quicker, I promise. Why do people,
They consider it a.
we are no longer viewed as a swing state for the presidency.
Right.
And Sharon losing will make that even harder. We have to earn, and two, the electoral college creates this horrible situation where overall we only fight for democracy in swing states, which is terrible. But I think after 20, so here's a little secret, and the phone's off now, so I can say this. The Biden campaign, this sounds awful to say, it's true. They didn't really try and win Ohio in 2020. No. But they sort of faked it like they did. Like Biden did that train trip. They ran ads in the media markets that bordered Pennsylvania and Michigan. They didn't really try here. And I got myself in hot water because I was kind of mad about it. Because if you don't try, you may not only not win, you'll lose by more. This was the first election, to your point, 24, where it didn't even look like they were trying. And I think that hurt Shared a lot. Because I think if we had done a spirited effort to lift turnout in our urban area, this was the first time that urban Ohio kind of knew they weren't a swing state. And our urban turnout was less because of it. And Kamala lost by 11 and Shared lost by 3. I think if we had had a normal presidential turnout in our urban areas, we wouldn't have won the presidency, but even trying, we should have had Kamala Harris headquarters all over our city. And that might have turned the vote out for Shared. Even though she would have maybe lost by 8 and 11, that might have been the difference. So my view is that, and Ken Martin, the new DNC chair, who I know well, good guy, he is talking about running everywhere. But the party, one, didn't view Ohio as a swing state, and two, although it's done better lately, continues to fall in this trap of we only fight for democracy in a handful of states, and that just hasn't worked, has it? Yeah.
Want to see some hope here, and what's going to happen is they see here, they're already discouraged. They're going to.
Yeah. Why? This is why it's very bad that Sharon lost, because that takes our one national strategic position. But 26, I believe, and it's weird to say this, especially if it's governor candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, I kind of feel like billionaires are going to be out of favor next year, if not now. Like biotech guys who made his billions because he convinced people he had a cure for Alzheimer's that didn't exist. I don't think he's a very good candidate at all, but he's going to destroy Dave Yost. And if Tressel runs, he will destroy Tressel. MAGA world has taken over that party. So I believe, and Houston is voting. I don't mean to insult a local guy now. I'm just kidding. Houston is voting for everything. He's part of the overreach. He's part of destroying Ohio State because he's okay with the NIH cuts. So I think 26 is our opportunity to turn Ohio blue. Honestly, I really believe that. This is not naive optimism. Okay, I know, Rose, we gotta go. Thank you all very, very much. I'll stick around and answer any questions.
Stephen, coming, if you would like to scan the QR code, David talked about what we need to do. We need to be doing things at the grassroots level, having people in our precincts, talking to their neighbors. Please scan this, please sign up for this. Before you leave, there are probably some cookies still in the back that you can take with you. There are books up here if you would like to get a book, and Dave will sign up for you. And I hope to see all of you in 2 weeks at our next meeting. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.
It's very